Good morning and welcome to SACAP's Parents Guide for Matric Support for 2022. I'm your host, Stephanie Dehaan, and I'm the Content and Events Manager for SACAP. So we know that studying in 2022 looks very different to studying 10 years ago. And if I may, it's when I finished. So learning and education keeps evolving with time. And as we move into a new era of education, parents might not be clued up on curriculums, but there are sure ways that you can support your matriculant. We also know that some of our attendees are guardians or someone just simply looking to support somebody else who is studying. So there are definitely some practical tools that you can take away today. Today, we'll go through the journey of online and hybrid learning, the importance of parental preparedness in supporting learners and students, and then practical coping strategies for parents, guardians, or just anybody in a position of support. Lastly, we'll chat about what the options are after matric. So I'll hold you no longer. Kat, I'll now hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for joining. My name is Clarke. I am the learning designer at SACAP, and I also used to be a matric teacher. So this is all very familiar to me, and I hopefully have a lot that I can share with you, both about changes in education that have happened lately, and also just how to support your matric level students, your kids. I called my matric students my kids. So, right. And I've also, just for context, I've taught in both the Western Cape and Eastern Cape, and I was a class teacher for matric, so it's very close to my heart. What I'm going to be talking on really is three things that are important. The first is understanding this era of flexible learning, and you'll hear me refer to blended learning, which is kind of the educated term that we're using for when there's both in-classroom and online education happening at the same time. The next thing is adapting to change. Obviously, you've been having to adapt to a lot of change. Your kids have been having to adapt to a lot of change, and the educators have been adapting to change. To give some context there. And then what I think most of you are here for is what parents can do to help, because there actually is quite a lot, even if it can feel overwhelming at times. So next, there's a diagram I'd like to show you on what is blended learning. You'll see it's a Venn diagram. So on the one side, it says classroom, which is the traditional schooling most people think of, the traditional university or tertiary education that people think of with lecture halls, anytime where there's an educator and students present in the same room. And then on the other hand, there is technology, which typically, when you think of learning via technology, that's someone on a computer at home or on a cell phone, accessing information on education that way. And there are pros and cons to both. And in the middle, you'll see there's a section that says blended learning. And in blended learning, we try to get the pros of each, but there are always sacrifices to be made at the same time. So since about 2020, we have had to adapt to not always being in the classroom, which means that blended learning, while it had started already, it was already an idea, it was already showing a lot of success, it got fast-tracked. It got accelerated and put into schooling environments where it was mostly before sort of tertiary level thing. And it meant that a lot of really useful innovation has happened that is benefiting the students, just with a few teething errors. So if you look at the classroom side, things that really work there are personalization, meaning you've got your educator and you've got your student, and the educator can, in real time, connect with that student and see what their needs are and make the education personal to them. There's also motivation. We are all social beings. We work better when there's someone there with us. If there's someone just taking time to look and see how we're doing. And of course, teachers always try to motivate their students anyway. There's teamwork because you're in a social environment. It's much easier to facilitate teamwork if there's a person sitting next to you already. And then there's the immediate feedback from your environment, from your educator, from your peers. Those are the pros of the classroom. But of course, some of the downfalls of the classroom is it has to be a specific setting. There can be health risks. It can be a distance problem. When you start coming to tertiary education, you might start having students who have other life responsibilities, maybe more remote settings. So it can be a challenge. There are also things you might miss out on because there are a lot of things that can be brought into the classroom using technology. There's not as much flexibility in a classroom because of the scheduling. So you don't want to miss out on some of those other things. On the technology side, you have the benefit of self-paced learning. That can be fantastic for people with different life circumstances, different needs, and you don't have to compare yourself to another person. You don't have to be feel like you're that one learner in a classroom who's different, or you're the one student who maybe is struggling with raising a child at the same time. There are a lot of ways where you focus on only competing with yourself. There's also a sense of tracking and control that you can get when you have technology. Things can be automatically monitored. A lot of the things are done for you. If you're an educator in a classroom with 40 students, it can be quite difficult to always check on how each student is doing. You can't easily go back and reflect. There aren't as many records unless you've taken them on a piece of paper. So with technology, you get benefits like that, where you have an overview of your class, which means that a quiet learner doesn't get lost. Someone who is showing a problem over time, you can compare, okay, this is when things started going a bit downhill for that student, or they do better in this sort of assessment and not so well in this sort of environment. They also do reduce costs. And when you have classrooms, you have limits on numbers. There's still limits when you have technology, but it's easy to manage things like that. You don't have to have a physical space that costs money to use. And it's reduced costs for the students in that there's not traveling time, there's not traveling expenses, and you can do it in your own way, in your own space. And then lastly, there's mobility. So like I said, it doesn't have to be in a classroom where everyone has to be at the same time. You don't have to have those traveling costs, and the timing is flexible. You can have classmates from all around the world in different time zones in some circumstances. Now, of course, with all of this, you also have some downsides. So for some students, having that connection one-on-one with a person or seeing a real face in front of them makes a big difference. And that can mean that some students might feel a bit isolated from the learning experience. They might miss some of the teamwork. They might miss having their peers. And sometimes you might find there's difficulty adjusting to having less of a routine with a fixed schedule. And that then needs to be created rather than just assumed like it is in a classroom. When we have blended learning, especially how we've done it with SACAP, is you pick out the most efficient combination of both. So there is a little bit of what I mentioned from the classroom side and a little bit of what I mentioned from the technology side, and you keep all the best that you can keep. And then when there are downsides to it, we look at how to face them. So what I'll be talking about for the rest of this is really how do you face those things? How do you face those challenges and overcome them and support your students and your children through adapting to that change, and where there are some gaps in support, maybe that a parent or a caregiver could really make a big difference when you know where the difference needs to be made. Right. So first, let me have a look at the challenges that the learners and educators have had to face right in the beginning of the sudden boom of blended learning. Whenever there's adjusting to change, there's difference. You'll see I have on the one side, I've got the learners' challenges. On the other side, I've got the educators' challenges, and really been facing the same things with only a few differences. So we're learning together. Now, it's been a little bit of time since that sudden fast tracking of blended learning. So educators are typically caught up with where they need to be, but there's still a lot of guidance that needs to happen with the learners. So I said, top one, adjusting to change, and that can take different amounts of time for different people, and that's okay. So it's just being aware that change itself, even good change, can cause stress. The next one you'll see on the learner side, I've got inadequate guidance in how to engage with blended learning. And on the educator side, I said inadequate training in how to create and facilitate blended learning. This happened a lot in schools specifically, where blended learning is newer compared to tertiary education, where there already is an element of blended learning for the last while. With learners or students, there's quite a big emotional change, emotional and motivation change that can take quite a while to learn. And with educators, it's a big restructuring. So if you'll find at SACAP educators are ready for this, but in different situations in matric teachers who have huge burdens on them. I was a matric class teacher, and I know that sometimes that extra bit of burden can be a lot more chaotic than you need it to be. That's something to bear in mind, that it's a learning process for everybody, and everybody needs some guidance in it. So the more you can learn about it, the more you can understand it, the more you can assist. Next, you'll see I've got technology on both sides. This can mean different things to different people. This could mean, and often doesn't mean, struggling to use the technology. A large number of students, parents, educators are actually quite comfortable with technology now. There are some new things. Some people struggle with the differences in video meetings. But for a lot of students, they're quite tech savvy, even just using their cell phones. Doesn't matter what background. Most kids will have their cell phone as their prized possession, and they will know how to make the best use of that. The difference comes in is adapting to using this technology in a different way, and also in terms of actually accessing technology. One of the biggest things is often for students who don't have access to a reliable internet connection. There are ways around this, but it can put a burden on some people more than others. So it's not just having that tech equipment, that ideally something like a computer or laptop to be able to work with, but making sure that you have the internet connection, because suddenly, before, you had your teacher in your classroom, you had your teacher able to be right there and talk to you. But now your connection with your teacher is via the internet in many circumstances. Your connection with your peers, your classmates. Without the internet, you can feel quite isolated. And that's one of the barriers. And educators realize this, and it's a constant question in educators' minds, and how can we make the online components, the online parts of our education more engaging in a social way, but also not putting the students in a new environment that's stressful and too demanding. You can't expect students to have internet access 100% of the time. So there's a balance there, and it gets better over time as people get more used to it and as infrastructure changes. You're finding that there's more publicly available Wi-Fi in different places. That has been a lifeline to a lot of students who don't have internet at home. You're finding data bundle packages for cell phones coming cheaper. different apps are providing different offers for using data at a cheaper rate or for free. I know my matric students, when I was teaching, this was now, I'm thinking 2018, they did everything through Vodacom on Facebook, because on Vodacom, Facebook gave, you could use Facebook for free. I'm not sure how they sorted that out. That's technology beyond me, but they made it work. And there was not a single learner in that class who had internet at home, but when they needed something, they made it work. So you can actually ask your kids, how are you making this work? How can we try and make it easier for you to access what you need? Because the requirements for learning are different from just outside what was in the classroom. Now you could need to do your homework while sitting in a shopping mall, because that's where you get your internet access. So it changes the environment a lot. And at the end there, this is something I will come back to specifically on the learner side, on the student side, shift in agency and responsibility. And to me, this is the biggest challenge for students facing blended learning, especially when they're still in secondary school, when they're still in high school, including the matric students, because many of them have never been asked this before in the learning environment, at least not to this degree. And it's also a place where parents can make a big role. And actually, you see a very big difference between the students who have to face this on their own and the students whose parents or caregivers realize that they need some guidance here. On the educator side, it's just the response to that, the shift in the learner-educator relationship. So the teacher isn't there all the time to motivate that student, to remind them what to do, to guide them through the activities as much. We do set things up online so that it has guidance, but it's still not a person there. It's an emotional difference. And then that comes the question then is, how can I guide the students or the children? In this case, focusing on matrics very specifically. And there are really 6 ways that I wanted to talk about. And these are all things I've identified in my own work and spoken to other educators about and other parents about. And it's places where you can make the biggest difference. So let's start off with realistic time expectations. Even if you think your child is perfect, I've never met a child who hasn't tried to take some shortcuts when it comes to education. Doesn't matter if they're the top in the class matric student or not. If there's some homework they can rush, they'll rush it. Right? And what often, when it comes to blended learning, is you suddenly have a situation where it's not just homework that has to be done at home, but actual learning of content, actual practicing of core concepts that normally would be done under the watchful eye of a teacher. Now, suddenly this is the responsibility of the learner, and they don't know, do I need to spend 10 minutes on this or 30 minutes on this or an hour on this over the next week? It's something that's easier to estimate when you're coming from the eyes of someone who's actually been in the world of work before, because it's more similar to the world of work. If you have a job and you're given a task, you decide how long you need to complete that. But in the school environment, you're given a time slot, and then the teacher comes and guides you through what you do in the time slot. So it's a reverse of what students are typically used to. So even if you don't know directly from the teacher how much time is needed, now a good teacher will give guidance on it. But if you've, you're a more experienced adult, you can look at it and you can think, this isn't something that my child can do in 10 minutes. This is something that requires a lot of reading. This is something that requires actually processing it and making mind maps or a draft first. If something is a draft first and a final copy, you can't do that in whatever amount of shortened time if you're only doing it once. So being there, looking at what your child needs to do and talking to them about what they need to put in to get the outcome that they want, so that they can succeed for their future is one way that you can support them. Next, I've got their schedules for self-directed learning. Now, students are used to schedules in really one way that's obvious to them, and that is with assessments. So they know, many of them have a diary or timetable where they've marked the assessments. And the learning schedule, that's in the teacher's notebooks for what's going to be covered in each lesson. But now, with self-directed learning, the student has to choose their own timing for when to do that piece of learning that they've been allocated. It's not as strictly controlled as it may have been before. Perhaps in a school setting, the school your child is at, the teacher will have already decided these things and carefully controlled it. But in other settings, the teacher might say, well, by the end of the week, you must have done these things. And if you find that your child is one that's easily distracted, that struggles with pacing themselves, these are all things I struggled with in school. I'm thinking about it now. Oh, how this would have helped me. This is a time where you can step in and help with some basic time management skills to make sure that they don't fall behind, or make sure that they don't leave it to the last minute and then have a lot of emotional stress from trying to get all these things done. Sometimes it's not just about being able to get it done, but being able to get it done without as much stress. The next one I have is create workspaces to enhance focus. This is one that sometimes parents don't realize the emotional effect of, because your child's used to doing homework. Why is now it in Matric so much more needed to have a specific workspace? Especially important now with blended learning. And this doesn't have to be something fancy. It doesn't have to be a beautiful big desk with technology on it. They don't need to have big posters in front of it or anything like that. The most important things for a child to have as a workspace is that they have a place where they can put their books. They can open their books comfortably. They can have their school bag with them, and it's their space. So I found this when I was teaching in an environment where the students didn't have their own room, for example, or there were quite a lot of school-aged children in the household. If it's their space, then it helps with that agency, with that taking control of their own learning. So if that one, they don't even, some of those kids, when they had their workspace, they didn't even have a chair. They just had something to press on to run it, and it made such a big difference. Now, of course, it's great if you have the luxury of nice, clean, organized desk, a bookshelf, and a laptop. I'm just saying you don't need those things. The most important part is that it can be a space that they own to do their work with their own willpower, where their stuff isn't moved around, and they can focus better when they have that. And it also shows support from the parents saying, hey, you're in Matric. This is an important year of your life. This is your time to really focus on your academics more than you've ever done before, and we're going to accommodate you. It's a very physically felt thing. It's not just an encouragement, whatever. It's a space. It's tangible. They can sit there and they can know that you've got their back, and you're giving them the best environment that you can for that. Great. Next one was study groups. Not everyone needs a study group, but when you have less class time, it's good to consider that maybe a less sociable child who doesn't really enjoy other people's company as much, maybe just because they don't have the normal classroom, it might be beneficial for them to also consider study group. So some students sort of organize study groups themselves because they're very comfortable with that, and that's how they're used to learning. Other students might need you to suggest that and say, well, would you like to see help me for me to help you find a venue for it? Do you want to study here? Do you know which classmates? Maybe you want it for one subject and not another subject. But it's being around people is important for happiness, and you can't learn if you're miserable. So see how your child is doing. Ask them how they feel. Do they miss having other students around? Even if they're quiet, not, don't make assumptions about what their needs might be. Maybe a study group will be what they can learn from better, or just even if they're doing well already. So it's something to consider, especially if your child is not having the same amount of time in a classroom. It's also useful when you reach tertiary education level, if your child's going to follow tertiary education, because in the tertiary education environment, study groups are naturally forming often, but they're often encouraged in things like tutorials. And it's good to practice it in Matric if you can, especially if you know your child is going to go into that later. And then the last two, these are less hands-on practical things. I've got agency and responsibility, and I've got emotional well-being. Now, another speaker is going to speak more on emotional well-being than me, but it's a very big one because it really is the inner world of your child and affects everything. And with agency and responsibility, it's very tied in with emotional well-being, because to have agency and responsibility, it can be hard to have that without good emotional well-being, and it can be hard to, and you can overcome difficulties with emotional well-being with being able to learn agency and responsibility. And when I say agency, I mean the student is your child is starting to, or increasing the amount of acceptance they have that they are the agent in their life. They are the person in control of themselves and their future, and they make their own choices with consequences that affects them more than anybody else. And with responsibility, that's closely linked in that I have to realize that there are things that need to be done if I want to be successful, and a teacher can't make you do those things. Sometimes if you're in a classroom, they can force you to do it, but really to get things done well, you have to take responsibility and do it yourself. When you track the educational path of a child, you usually see that a teacher starts off taking most of the responsibility, the teacher and the parent together, depending on the age. And as you progress through school, you're expected to do more on your own. And often there's a big jump from between matric and tertiary education. Now we're starting to see that more change, more responsibility is being given in matric. And for some students, it's a sudden needing to grow up fast in terms of taking agency and responsibility for their own learning. And sometimes even a really hardworking student needs help with the kind of mind shift you need with this. There's some more abstract things like having trust in yourself and your own ability, being able to try things on your own and not have to run to somebody else for help. It's great to ask help when you need it, but to try first is something that a surprisingly large number of students struggle with. They want to be told how to do it first before trying, and often that comes from the education system and the way that the teaching happens. So I want to speak to 3 short messages, they're quotes that I used to put up in my classroom, not just for the matrics, but for all my students. And this is really about adjusting to this agency and responsibility. And it's surprising how much gently repeating and encouraging these messages, not necessarily in these words, but these messages can make a difference to your stressed out matric learner. The first one I have is mistakes are proof that you are trying. One of the places that I saw matrics being scared to make mistakes was in their practicing past papers. And to me, I went through this a long time ago. I'm out of matric for a long time, and I think, but it's a past paper. You're not marked on this. But because it looked like an actual exam, the pressure was so big that they found it difficult to find the motivation to just start practicing them on their own. And I came up with an odd saying to them when they weren't trying to work on it, when they were distracted because they were stressed. I'd say, fail now so you can pass later. Meaning that you've got this past paper in front of you, try it, get it wrong. Even if you're 100% sure you're going to get it wrong, if you try, then you're processing it differently, you're thinking about it differently. Make the mistakes now so that you can succeed later. Yeah. And when you try something, you interact with it, and that is learning. It's not about getting it right. The next one is success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out. There's this another similar one. I think it said a stone is only broken after you've hit it with a hammer many times. It's not the first hit of the hammer. It's not, you can't expect things to happen the first time you do it. And those small things add up. And when a student is feeling demotivated, they're feeling like there's so much to do that they can't put 100% into everything, or things aren't working out the way they wanted. It's good to remind them that it's the little bits they do every day, they add up. And they don't have to see something big and flashy and a nice mark on something that they've done. Marks count, but in the end, those class marks are a whole bunch of little marks that add up to support their final mark. It's not the end of the world if they get one bad matric mark. And it can be done. They don't need to be discouraged. It's just keeping on that effort. And the last one, I'm not telling you it's going to be easy. I'm telling you it's going to be worth it. And that's just a message of hope, really. Sometimes there are things happening in the world that can make it feel like no matter how hard you try, things might not work out. And matric is a time where your child really needs to believe that what they put in is going to bring them a better future. It is going to be worth it, no matter how stressful it might be for them. And when you said that, it's also showing them that you don't expect them to always be okay. There will be times when they're stressed out. There will be times when they don't get things right. It isn't easy, but you've got their back because you believe in it being good for their future, so they can also believe that it's good for their future. So maybe when you see the recording, write some of these down and put it up on the wall for them, put it in a sticky note. I used to put just little positive notes around my classroom for my students as little reminders, because everyone needs a reminder of hope every now and then when they're going through something quite stressful. Okay. If you have anything you want to ask me about with this, I'll of course be here for the question and answer session at the end. And yeah, that's all for me. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at this webinar. A very important one indeed, considering that trials are upon us and the final exams are around the corner, but also not just for our matric learners. So the content we're discussing today will extend to learning as a lifelong journey. And that's one of my particular passions. And I'm Jogini Packery. I'm a counseling psychologist and the head of campus of SACAP Johannesburg campus. So let's get straight into it. Today we're talking about being the pillar of strength, or the pillar for the pressure that the learners are currently undergoing. And that means that parenting, an already complicated and complex role, needs to be zoned in a little bit more. So the role of the parent around exam time does need to be tailored to the demand at that time. And what it requires of parents is to hold a few different roles. And these are just some that we're going to unpack today. It's that of the nurturer, the cheerleader, the coach, the soundboard, and the role model, because we know that children do as we do and not necessarily as we say. So let's unpack these a little bit further. So what does it entail of you to be that nurturer? And we'll see in the next slide that we will unpack it a little bit more. Some of the strategies that you can pair with these roles. All right, so it's important, it's okay to say you need to be these roles, but what really does that mean for you as the parent? So as the nurturer, you are particularly promoting and enabling healthy living. Kat has just stressed the importance of having a space that your child as a learner can call their own. They can grow their autonomy in that space. They can build their agency in that space. It's good when they're able to take care of their space and be responsible for that space. But as the parent, it's important for you to ensure that they have that sort of environment in the home. It goes a step a little bit further than that. Healthy living is not only looking at a healthy learning space, but it also looks at maintaining a healthy body and a healthy mind. The mind, of course, is the tool of learning. So it is essential that we're taking care of the mind. What this means is, as a parent, you can oversee and not hover, but oversee that your child is getting enough sleep, that their eating habits, and of course you can provide healthier snacks, but that their eating habits are correct, they are consuming sufficient water, because we know our brains need to be hydrated, that they are also moving around. So excessively studying and not taking effective breaks for the brain to absorb and to rest, but also for the body. So movement is very important, whether it's getting up to get a glass of water, getting up to go for a walk outside and get some sun. Those are important movement things. If your child is into exercising, we would encourage that. If they're not into exercising, listening to music, having a dance session, or simply going for a walk, walking a dog or walking with a family member. It's also a good connection and bonding opportunity. Or maybe just walking with themselves, listening to music that they enjoy and connecting with themselves. The strategy is then behind cheerleader, because everybody needs a cheerleader. Everyone needs someone who believes in them unconditionally. And if we can just stay on the previous slide for a moment, is the strategy of being that effective cheerleader is to prioritize your child's emotional well-being. So we know that Matric has a particular goal, and we know that passing Matric is very important for this point in life. But it's very important that you also ensure that your child understands that passing Matric should not be at the cost of their mental health. What I mean by this is, yes, Matric is an important milestone, and yes, it's important in your career development, but there are other ways of getting through to your pathway or your chosen career pathway if things don't go well in Matric, because we fully understand that Matric is assessing how much you can take in and regurgitate. And that also means that there's time constraints. That also means that it is a highly anxiety-provoking situation, and we don't always perform the best if our mental state is not at its best. So ensure that you're prioritizing and you're having these conversations with your children. That's where the coaching role comes in, and this is to promote and enable proactive stress management, which we'll unpack a little bit later. So it starts with conversations, and it starts with two key elements. One is empathic listening. So you're actually listening to your children to understand where they're at. This is their journey. We're just there to walk alongside them. We've had our chance. We've had our opportunity. It's very important that we do not try to live vicariously through our children, because that will put unrealistic pressure and expectations on them. It might also have them internalizing that pressure and expectations and then looping it and putting that stress on themselves as well. So let's get out of the habit of talking from our perspective and get into the habit of listening to their perspective, which is the second one. It's meeting your child where they're at. Once we've listened and we understood, we can then reflect back, and they can really help us understand where they're at. With that information, we then can move into the soundboarding stage. And this is where we're testing whether we're being realistic. We're looking at what were previous grade records. We're looking at realistically how much time we have. So you're looking at what can we control and what can't we control. And from what we can control, you have the entire internet of information to look at options, to look at plan B, C, D, all the way to plan C. And there are different ways to find out who's offering particular courses, like SACAP offers courses all the way from higher certificate to masters, and those sort of things. So really just putting everything out, mind mapping, looking for options, and ensuring that your children are thinking from an open-minded perspective. So if you today, as we pause and take this break to reflect on your role as a parent, if you are maybe seeing on your test measure or your temperature measurement this morning that perhaps your thinking is a little bit narrowed and you're just zoning into one element, then perhaps you first need to take that step back, which comes to the role model element. With emotional well-being, we need to start with ourselves. And we'll unpack that to quite some extent as I proceed. So I'm going to go into the next one and just leave you with a few tips of each of these categories, but I'm really going to zone in to that role modeling element. So on the next slide, we're looking at what does this nurture really mean? What does it really mean to employ the strategy of promoting and enabling healthy living and a healthy living, healthy lifestyle? Is to ensure, again, that the mind is healthy, to ensure that the environment is healthy. And here I want to zone into distractions. So we all get distracted from time to time. If you try to meditate and you're new to meditating, it's not a very easy task, but it's just about remaining mindful. So not the mind full of everything, because that can be overwhelming, but mindful and focused on the particular task at hand. And that requires of us, like Kat has spoken about, the scheduling, and it's important to understand, are you a structured person? So you need structure, and that's where the parent can come in to help create structure. Or are you a person that likes to work out of the box, and structure kind of just stifles your creativity and your thinking processes? So once we know what our thinking is like, we need to look at how do we focus. And if we have a good schedule that aligns with our thought processes, we can identify what are our distractions. Now, I laugh when I say distractions because being a PhD student myself, this is something I tend to struggle with from time to time. And speaking to my students, I know that this is a very common experience among students. It's called procrastination. So procrastination is occupying our time with things that we should not be prioritizing, and that detracts us from our goals and what we should be prioritizing. But we do find that what is distracting us are things we enjoy, things that make us happy. It might be watching a movie, it might be watching your favorite series, reading your favorite book, socializing with your friends and family, listening to music. So distractions then later become an important role in our daily routines. if we flip the script and refer to them as rewards. And if we set particular goals for the day in that schedule and set a time for us to enjoy our rewards, because we've earned it, right? This is a lot of work we're talking about. It's mentally tiring, and we need that space at the end of the day to ensure that our fitness routines are being met. And a big word in my entire life is self-care, to ensure that we're refilling that thinking tank, to ensure that we have a sure process and a consistent process to wind down at the end of every day. And make sure we end every day on a high note with a reward, because we've worked hard and we deserve it. If we go into the next slide where we're looking at cheerleaders specifically, this is where we're talking and understanding that emotions, as we mentioned. But as a parent, you need to start with these elements. You need to understand where your emotional experience is, because if you're feeling stressed, everyone in your environment will feed off that, right? Identify your sources of stress so that you can help your children identify theirs. Be very aware of your negative feelings so that you can help them identify theirs and unpack it. And then emphasize the importance of having that calm and emotionally supportive home. And this requires teamwork. This really requires everyone in the home to be on the same page. It's good and well to have a working space that's conducive, but if the TV is glaring from the lounge and the radio is glaring from the kitchen, it's very difficult to zone out and come to that focus. If we can ensure that that focus for the scheduled period of studying is being met, then we can say that your child has asserted themselves the best as they can. And we can be confident that they've given their exams the best that they could. And then we can be happy with the results because they've truly given everything they can. Going into the coaching space, as we move along, you see that what we really need to understand for ourselves so we can help our children understand is stress is not always a negative thing. Stress is like that ignition spark on a car. It's what gets us going. And we call this eustress. This is the stress that creates enough tension and enough motivation and enough drive to chase our goals and to achieve, and that's where our successes are built off. It's when the stress is exceeding a healthy level, where, and how we know it's exceeded and crossed that line, is where it's preventing us from achieving our goals, where it's preventing us from having sufficient mental capacity to focus on a goal and get through it and channel that stress positively. What is important here is that we plan as best as we can. It's okay to be nervous. It's okay to feel stressed. But if we have planned and we have done our best, the outcome will represent what our best looks like. And if we need to then go back to the soundboard and revise that on the next go, then we can do that, because we can be mental. We are human. We can be mentally agile because we are human, and we need to offer ourselves that kindness. If we go on to soundboarding, that is where we now need to bring in that agility. And here we need to look at where are the positives, where are the negatives, make sure that it is our children's hopes and visions that we're putting there, because then we're focusing on what they really can achieve outside of what we hope for them. So while as a parent, it's beautiful to have hope for your kids, it's beautiful to have dreams for them, but make sure it's not encroaching on their hopes and their dreams for their future. Instead, let's help them explore their goals and how they can follow various paths, because we'll see in adulthood there's many ways to get to the end goal. Sometimes there's speed bumps along the way. We live in South Africa. Sometimes there's potholes. So a speed bump might delay your process. A pothole might clap out your entire tire, and now you just need to park on the side for a moment, because things like finances, things like resources, all come into play in how smooth this journey can go. And into the role modeling, and this is where I really want to stress, and this is really where I want to stay for the rest of my time on the session. With the role modeling, it is essential that you are able to model what you want for your child. As we know from early childhood, little kids learn from watching what you do rather than what you say. They tend to move like you move, they tend to talk like you talk, and play dress up with what you wear. So keeping that in mind, it doesn't really change throughout life. It's just that our attention changes to who we're focusing on, right? So with this, it is important for you to be very in check and very self-aware of where you're emotionally at. Keep yourself cool, calm, and collected. So you can deal with it. I'm not saying that you always have to be cool, calm, and collected, but know that there's a space for you to deal with your emotions and go through it. And when you're going into this supportive parenting role at this time during your child's learning period, it needs to be from a collected and calm space. It needs to come through and be intact, that you are taking care of yourself, because by taking care of yourself, you demonstrate the importance for your child to take care of themselves. This also relates to when you're feeling stressed. And like I say, your environment can sense that. So when you're feeling stressed, how do you manage it? That becomes your coping strategies. That becomes the coping strategies that your children are exposed to. So by default, that's what they know in their environment. And that's what they will tend to apply unless they are taught something different. So take care of your own mental health. And in that, you will understand that you are building your resilience, so you're growing with your children. Your growth doesn't pause so that your kids can continue to grow through their life stages. Your life stages are also progressing. So it kind of goes back to that teamness. And if we move on, you'll see that teamness means we work together. And in order to be that pillar of strength and that pillar for your child to regulate the pressures of being in matric, or just the pressures of exams. If you have children who aren't at matric level, they're in lower grades, or they've proceeded to university or college, it's about teamwork. It's about working together. Because, like I say, they will mirror how you react to the real life stresses of every day. They're almost in adulthood. It's a very important transition time for them. And these tips are going to help set the foundation for them as now young adults, beyond even the matric exam. So if we look at how we respond emotionally and how we choose to behave or act on those emotions, the biases that we have, our value system, these are things we need to be so mindful of, because whether we intend to, we are teaching it to our children every day in the way we interact with them. So these all shape their cognitive processes. And the key, as we move along, you see, is in this co-regulation, the key is to help them sufficiently co-regulate on their own and critically think for themselves. So when they're presented with any information, any crisis, any decision-making process, they are able to look at the information present, they are able to look at what information is missing, and they are able to critically come to an informed decision. And that is an essential skill in adulthood. If we move on to the next slide, I think if we just sit on this one for a second. So this starts with containing your own emotional state during turbulent times. And the pressure will continue to rise until we see the end of this year. You need to firstly acknowledge your state. So ask yourself, what am I feeling? Okay. Once we know what we're feeling, what's making us feel this way? Right? Then we can contain that emotional experience. And by containing, we don't mean minimizing it or trying to wrap it up and shove it somewhere. By containing, we mean processing through it, understanding why we feel this way, what's making us feel this way, and who are the stakeholders in this engagement, right? We can then articulate and express that. Kat, when you say something, it makes me feel this way. I either like it or I either don't like it. So the information that Kat has shared this morning, for me as a student, reassured me that perhaps I'm doing some things right, but it also showed me that perhaps sometimes I need to be a bit more disciplined, or I need to look at improving a few more things with how I'm thinking about my learning and relating to my learning. And that is how you should be reflecting on your everyday engagements. Know when your current resources are not enough. Maybe I need to reach out to Kat at the end of the session and to try and get some more help on certain areas, because I really feel like I'm doing my best, but I'm just hitting a wall. I'm just not seeing the results I want to see. So make sure you understand when you can cope with what you have within you and when you need to turn to someone else, when that someone else can be a friend, a peer, a colleague to soundboard off each other, or when it really needs to be a professional in that space so that you can get expert help. If we then move on, right? So it then also requires us to have that rational space when we are engaging with our children. And if you have flown before, you know, before an airplane takes off, we are told safety guidelines, and we are told to firstly put on our own mask in the case of a crisis. And if the pressure in the cabin drops, the air mask will drop down, and you must put on your own mask first before you try to assist anyone else, even if it's your child. And if we look at that, is if we think of ourselves as a vehicle for helping our children get to the end of this year, if we're running low on fuel, we're not going to go anywhere. Our car is going to struggle, and it's eventually going to come to a stop. And that's what we want to avoid. But remember, while we're that vehicle, our children need to take lead of their journey. And this is where you have to differentiate what are your feelings from their feelings, what are your goals from their goals, what are your stresses from their stresses. And by doing that, you can put your stuff aside and find other ways and other outlets for dealing with it. But ensure that you're focusing that space in dealing with your children's experiences. And like I said again, remember to practice effective and empathic listening. Here we are listening to understand, not listening to respond, not listening to advise, not listening to guide, but firstly listening to understand. Then we can really engage in what is going on in our children's lives. Steph, if we just move on to the next slide, please. How do we achieve this is really zoning into the strengthening the team, right? And I'm going to quickly go through these elements because you guys will have access to the resource after, and you will be able to engage with it. And Steph will provide additional access as well, is effective communication strategies, healthy help-seeking behaviors, effective time management and planning, grounding ourselves in the times of turmoil and chaos, and avoiding burnout. Effective communication strategies looks like this. It's about releasing our emotional tensions, reaching out to someone we trust, expressing ourselves, unpacking, getting other people's perspectives and ideas, taking that in, working through it, and creating meaning of what we're going through so that we can move forward with a greater understanding of our experience and who we are as individuals, but then also create that mental space where you can now sit with your children and say, okay, I've sorted through my thoughts, through my feelings. Now I have capacity to deal with your thoughts and your feelings, and really thriving instead of just trying to survive, right? If we move on, we'll see that another way that we need to strengthen this team is those healthy help-seeking behaviors. Knowing when it's not sufficient to just chat to a friend, knowing our personal limits, right? Being able to connect, and in the case of learning, that could be reaching out to your children's educators, reaching out to the principal, or seeking other professional guidance as needed. But we need not struggle in silence, and we need not struggle on our own, because that tension within us then feeds into our children's experiences, right? By doing this, we're already modeling that it's okay to ask for help when you're struggling, even as an adult. We don't know everything, we don't have the answers to everything, and we don't always know how to cope through everything, but we are willing to learn, and that is what we need to model for our children. The next role of the team, and I mean the team could just be you and your child, and it depends on how your family is structured, or if your child is perhaps with grandparents, then this is important information to relate to them as well. Is when it comes to time management and planning, we need to know what we're planning around. So we need to set goals, and then we need to allocate time, because time is a scarce resource. We only have so much in a day, which means we need to prioritize and plan effectively. We need to reflect on what we've achieved for the day. We need to be able to make changes to the day, make changes to the next day, make changes to the week. But what is key in resilience is that we're not throwing away what we haven't achieved. If it's important and we prioritized it, we're finding another space for it. So this also means those distractions we spoke about, finding a place for family time, finding a place to socialize with cousins and friends, and finding a place to relax and read and watch what you like and show on social media. So it's about the balance, and we achieve that balance by planning ahead. We also use technology because, like we're sitting here today, all 18 of us in different areas, we can connect. So how do we actively and effectively help our children use technology to their advantage at this time, so that we make space for the distractions, we limit the distractions, we're able to focus on what we need to. We have the resources to make the most of that focused time, and we can reward ourselves once we succeed on that goal. If we move on, then we'll see that grounding, and this is the second last point that I'd like to chat to you guys about today. Grounding means we're often going to start the day with a beautiful plan, and things are going to happen. Life happens, life is messy. It's not a perfect linear sequence where everything works neatly and everything cooperates with the plans you have. So what we need to do when we feel that things are just throwing us for a curveball, this is not what we planned, this is not what we expected, and we find ourselves a little bit rattled. So we need to try and ground ourselves in the moment. It might mean breathing, and ways we can do that is if you take your hand, breathe in, breathe out, and the pace at which you're moving your finger to trace your hand determines the breathing pace. So if you want to calm down, go with a slower pace. And if you're feeling a little bit fatigued, let's try and pick it up, right? Another way to do it if you're feeling very overwhelmed is, and we'll come to the activity in a moment, but other ways you can do is choose a letter, any letter, and try to name a place, a name, a place, a car, a color. Set your categories. And if you find you're often feeling overwhelmed, you can even write down those headings, and you can write down the alphabet on a page. And when you feel overwhelmed, close your eyes, land on an alphabet, go through your headings, and that just focuses your brain again, right? You can also do this through muscle tension and release. Just close your eyes, focus your breathing, clench your toes, release your toes. Clench your foot, release your foot. Try and clench up your ankle, release, and you move through your body. A very helpful way that Kat also mentioned is affirmation statements. Stick them all around the house if you must. Stick them into lunch boxes. throw them into a school bag, but do this for yourself as well and for your loved ones. It's nice to get to work and open up your lunch and there's a cute little message waiting for you. Use social media, pop it in a WhatsApp when you know your loved ones have gotten to work or they've gotten to school, a motivation message to get them through the day. So grounding is very important, and one activity that we're going to leave you guys with. So this is something you can do, and it's on the, there we go. So this is what you can do right now. If all the content from today is sounding too much and you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, find 5 things that you can see. Find 4 things that you can touch. Listen to your environment. What are the 3 things that you can hear? Take a deep breath in. What can you smell? What's cooking in the kitchen? What's happening outside? And then 1 thing that you can taste, whether it's, and if you an avid water drinker, you know that water has different tastes. Is it water? Is it your tea? Is it whatever? So take stock of that. That's a way of grounding yourself. And once you've grounded yourself, you can refocus, or you can direct your focus to where it needs to be. And then we move on to something that is very, very important, and something that some of you might be feeling right now. And this is burnout. So burnout is fatigue beyond something that sleep can repair. If you are sleeping your 7 to 8 hours a day and you are waking up exhausted, or if you see this happening with your child, that means that they are mentally fatigued and sleep is not going to be enough. We need to go back to the healthy eating, the entire healthy lifestyle elements that we spoke about. We need to go back to our planning, our scheduling. We need to go back to our expectations and how realistic they are. We need to go back to whose expectations are causing the stresses. And then we need to consciously engage in positive, caring or self-care behaviors so that we can get our mental state back to where it needs to be and back to where it's energized enough to take on the task at hand. But remember, if we continue in a burnout state, we are exposing and risking ourselves to higher stress levels, to higher pressure levels, to anxiety, to depression. And one of the major concerns that many of the parents I engage with is that the pressure is going to be too much, that my child can't go through this, that my child can't manage this. And there are concerns of when children cannot cope, then suicide rates increase. We see this every year when Matric comes around. And it's very important for us to build all of these healthy habits so that we can facilitate these healthy habits in our children's lives, and that they can be more mentally agile and more mentally resilient, and know that there are always options and know how to find those options. All right. And with that, I leave you with some reminders. And these are 4 things to know: that our coping strategies must learn and grow as we grow. What has helped us in one situation is not always going to help us effectively in other situations. There is no one size fits all. There are no magical solutions. It does come back to developing. Developing requires self-awareness, critical thinking, continuously reflecting on what we are doing every day and how we can do it better. So while this is a challenging time, it's a time you and your children definitely can thrive in. We can definitely make the most of this year. We can bond through this year. And when we get to the end of the year, if the results are not what we intended, let's look at other plans. I'm going to hand over to Praneetha so she can unpack some of those plans for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogs. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, everybody. I'm Praneetha Jugdeo, the head of campus at Durban, who believes that the world needs more individuals who are value-driven, takes responsibility for their actions, and who do not have the right when nobody is watching. Students who are always going to apply their knowledge and skills in the pursuit of creating a better world for all. regardless of the race, religion, class, or culture. Next slide, please. Education awakens the power and the beauty that lies within us. Education does not only mean academic excellence. Nelson Mandela. In the present era of digitized world, it is the biggest challenge before educators and parents to nurture the young minds with the impressions of a holistic learning. Using a comprehensive approach to teaching and learning, where educators, parents seek to address the emotional, social, ethical, and academic skills of students in an integrated learning, being a formal or a non-formal qualification. Going on. Right now, students and parents are probably being questioned and thinking of a lot of questions, mostly and especially the question, quote, what are you planning on studying next year? What have you applied? Or I think you should study this or study that. Or what are your different options? With this, I want to assure parents and students that these are social, economic, and educational uncertainties who will always have a way in every sort of form. It is the part and parcel of life. The more important issue is how do we manage them? It's also about one's emotional state of mind or staying mentally healthy. There's 4 principles that helped me, and I want to share them with you. Unique. You have a unique contribution to make in life, and there's no one else quite like you. Feeling good about yourself is called self-esteem. Good self-esteem helps you cope when life is really tough. Next, communicate. Don't bottle up your uncertainties and fears. Talking about your feelings will help you stay in a good mental health, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed and controlled. You are in charge of your future, no one or nothing else. As much as external forces have a massive influence, you are in control. Parents are not often aware of all the options that's available to their children. It's helpful to consider what options are open to a successful or not so successful matriculant. Parents should also prepare themselves mentally and emotionally for success and for failure. Going on. Expectations, yes or no? If a student's matric results meet or have not met expectations, this must not be viewed as a defeat. Parents and students need to adopt a more positive mindset and open to the opportunities that are available to them. Understanding that a single outcome of matric results is not the total sum of their intelligence, nor does it predict an unsuccessful future. The important thing is how parents and students respond and react. Also, do a personal assessment of the student, their needs to improve, what their interests are, and what avenues they need to explore in order to create a better future for themselves. Many of this could mean working on improving their matric results, which is okay. The important thing going forward is work towards taking small steps daily and being proactive by setting goals and continuously developing and seeking out opportunities to develop. Going forward. This is something that we look into, and this is something that's always been on a student's mind. Taking a gap year in your thoughts. Taking a gap year after high school is a great way to recharge your batteries, to gain new experience, and to prepare yourself to hit the ground running in tertiary education. Studies have shown that students who deferred their admissions by a year, whether they choose to work, travel, volunteer, or pursue some other passion, are more likely to graduate on time, to get better grades, and most importantly, to enjoy tertiary education than those who go straight from high school. This will also create many positive opportunities in life. What are the benefits of taking a gap year? Excelling in college or in university? Taking a gap year before college allows you to perform or excel better. It also decides as to which tertiary education you want to go to. What this means is having a year to take off between completing high school and starting tertiary education will persevere you into taking education more seriously. It also allows you to explore in great detail to discover how the world operates firsthand and then to understand the value of education. You will have enough time to think about your future. Taking a gap year will give you time to think about your passion in life and also what you should study in order to pursue that passion. So often, many students do not take time to figure out what they want to do or what they want to achieve. Try to avoid making costly decisions. Before you know it, it will be too late and you're stuck in a career or a degree that does not appeal to you and does not have your passion in mind. Exploring and experiencing what the world has to offer. Not many people, students especially, are blessed with the opportunity to travel the world. Many students can start their career immediately after graduating, leaving them with no time to explore the world. By taking a gap year, this gives you an opportunity to travel the world and explore new experiences. It will also be a perfect time to reflect, to learn more about yourselves and how to make the change and add value to the world through your experience. Learning to become more independent. Whether you are traveling, working, it teaches you how to be your own person, how to instill a sense of independence as a person. As a student, you spend most of your life under the wing of your parents or close relatives. By taking a gap year, you will become independent. You'll be able to set your own schedule and be your own person. Learning to be independent and taking full responsibility will not only benefit you in your tertiary education years, but throughout your life. This is something that a lot of students do not learn at a young age until later in life. Less likely to reach a burnout. If you do not take care of your overall being, you will become stressed and reach a level of burnout. Reaching burnout is not conducive for reaching your ultimate success in tertiary education. Therefore, being able to take the time will also give you the time that you need to recuperate and to enter tertiary education rejuvenated and ready to learn. These were the benefits of the gap year. But let's forget about the gap year and let's look at a scenario. If a student does not achieve a bachelor's pass, what happens? Repeating the matric year is not only the option. They could enroll for a higher certificate that could pursue them into a degree qualification without having to repeat matric. Lack of sleep, anxiety, fear for the future with concerns about how to prepare the students is a factor that could also impact on the emotional state of parents. Going forward, the benefits of a higher certificate, the changing world of work. Although the world flipped upside down, parents, students have rolled with the change as students have kept their heads down and their studies up. We know that this has not been easy, and with the change, many of us as students need to start from the bottom and progress to where we want to go. The same applies to education. Many institutions offer different qualifications to enable students to access the higher education and to move into the higher levels of qualification and to achieve their goals in their careers. Education has become a lifelong requirement as the world is so dynamic. To keep us with a fast-paced environment, one needs to keep learning to remain empowered and relevant. Whether you are looking to enter the world as an employer, employee, or even start an NGO, it is essential to arm yourself with skills to propel your venture or create a career going forward. There are many academic pathways that permit a student to start off with a higher certificate and to articulate this into a diploma or a degree. The benefits of getting a higher certificate is to expand your skill set. You are acquired with new skills, as well as refreshing and updating your knowledge. Open doors to other courses and qualifications, to broaden your career opportunities, to improve your chances of career progression, and to feel empowered. Next slide. The benefits of a higher certificate in the fourth industrial revolution, and Kat has mentioned about blended approach and about technology. Technology has become an inevitable part of our lives. We cannot imagine how to survive with technology in today's fast-moving world. When employment, socialization, and cultural propagation happens with globalization, we cannot survive with the technological environment or involvement. 4IR, which is the fourth industrial revolution, will require education in schools and tertiary environments to properly prepare students with the right tools to come up with new and innovative solutions to today and tomorrow's problem-solving society. The skills that we require for fourth revolution or fourth industrial revolution is communication skills, which is the ability to convey and share feelings and ideas effectively, and essential to allow others and yourselves to understand information more accurately and more quickly. Next, being emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and to manage your own emotions in a positive way, to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and to diffuse conflict. Another, being critical thinking. This is self-guided, self-disciplined thinking, which attempts to reason to form a judgment. Collaboration is working practice whereby individuals work together for a common purpose to achieve business benefits. All the above skills that one gathers and learns and applies as the foundation as they start their career from bottom to top. We as parents need to be open-minded and to look ahead and to help our children by changing the world, as only we can make a difference. Next slide. Is it really worthwhile in terms of job opportunities? The higher certificate is a qualification which is skill-based qualification, which means there's a lot of focus on how we put skills and how skills are applied. There's a focus on achieving a set of skills which is required to perform in the chosen field. A qualification is typically industry-oriented. Students will receive the basic introduction along with practical techniques to help them gain entry into the chosen fields. The higher certificate can attract employers and help them get a job if the job requires some sort of education and skills. So my response is yes and a no, depending on the job entry levels. Many requirements needed on the field or the career one wants to enter. One may find that a higher certificate will give you the right start to begin your career. Looking on the side, entry-level jobs could be a call center agent, administrator, receptionist, a blogger, or even starting your own business. Now, the higher certificate enables one to start or build one's education as a foundation. It also starts and enrolls one even in a higher qualification, from an advanced certificate to a diploma to a degree in the same related field of study or one that wants to study. It could be business management, psychology, human resource management, social work, medicine, law, engineering. Whatever your career option may be, one needs the skills in a higher certificate to start with. Next slide. My personal recommendation and opinion. Right now, class of 2022 scenario. We're still in COVID, pandemic, the new normal. Grade 12 release dates. When? Are we coping? Are we stressed? When will we receive acceptance letters? What do we do? How can we offer help to others if we can't help ourselves? What do we do if I don't get a place to study the career option that I want? Will I take a gap year? I will write for a bachelor's pass, which I might get or not. These are the questions that's playing mind games with you. SACAP has an answer. Contact a campus near you to question the higher certificate. To conclude, a world of opportunity for those who are bold, adaptive, and innovative. We are passionate about educating for a better world, and we are fully committed to taking SACAP to the next level of academic excellence. Let's work together to prepare your child for a better future, as only they can make a difference in the world into skills, technology, and applied education. A winner is a dreamer who never gives up. Thank you. I now hand you back to Steph.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Praneetha. And just thank you to all our speakers. I know we've run out of time, but we do hope that the information that you received here today was helpful and that you've enjoyed this webinar. We do recommend that you follow us on social media, where we share upcoming events, webinars, new courses that have been released. And in 2 weeks' time, as Jogini spoke quite a bit about your own well-being, we do have a webinar on self-care and how this relates to our resilience. So please do check our social media as well as our website to sign up to that one, or just to receive the recording. I would like to say thank you once again to all of our speakers for a lovely and informative session. And once again, thank you to all our attendees. We hope you have a lovely day further.